Hey, it's Jim from Janku, and I was looking at a Reddit post that we made about Plenty, a static site generator that we've created over here at Janku. And one of the comments I see down here from Oh Hi Marcos is, could I hook a Plenty site into Netlify? So that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. And let's go take a look at doing that. So over here, I'm signed into Netlify, and I have a couple of just starter websites that I use here for testing purposes. And then over here, on my GitHub repository, I have this example here. So this is a Plenty site that basically is a pager example. So this is showing a multiple pager, so you can have two pagers on a single page. And I'm thinking I'm just going to use this example site, since it already exists, to deploy it over here to Netlify hosting service. So to get started, I'm going to come over here, and on my team overview, I'm going to create a new site from Git. So I'll click on this option here, and we're going to connect this to GitHub. And since I'm already signed in this browser, it knows that it wants the Jim A. Fisk account here. So I'm going to say that's okay. And I'll authorize Netlify to connect. And then once again, I'll come here and I'll choose this option one more time. And I'll choose GitHub. And then I'll choose my Jim A. Fisk account here. And I only want to use select repository, so I'll choose this option here. And for this repository, I'll look up the multi-pager example, and I'll select that. And I'll come down here and I'll say install. And I'm not sure why I have to keep clicking back into that button. I think it has something to do with the Brave browser possibly blocking some pop-ups, but if you're using Chrome or Firefox, you might not need to do that. So down here we have this finally selected, so we have the Plenty multi-pager example selected here. And now I can click on this to go to the next step. And now it's asking for some build options to deploy. So if I scroll down here, now it's saying to use the main branch here, so that's the branch that we have for our main repository here, so that's good. If I come down here, and it's looking for a build command. The Plenty build command is just Plenty build in the published directory that it creates. So by default, it creates a public directory, but you can change this if you wanted to pass a different option up here. You could do that. So under the advanced build settings, you could add new variables here. So you could add a new variable and you could set that to some value. So this is environment variables. I'm going to get rid of that. So for now, we'll just select deploy site. So we'll see here that this failed. Now that's because they're not finding the Plenty binary. That's not included on Netlify's continuous integration building process by default. So if we come down here, if we look at this, you see that Plenty is not found. So that binary is not on this container yet. So you see over here in this site, we have this potential for build image selection. This is a new feature. So previously, all the builds were done on a single image in Netlify, and now they're allowing you to use different images to actually build your site. So we need a specific image for Plenty. So I'm going to go to Sites, Build and Deploy, Continuous Deployment, Build Image Selection. So come back here. We go back. Let's go to Site Overview. Let's go to Site Settings. Under Build and Deploy. And we're under Continuous Deployment. So in here, we want to do a search for build image selection. And you can see here that it's flagged with this beta flag here. So I'm going to edit this. So at this point, I was actually a little surprised by the Netlify configuration. So we set up our build command. We looked at Plenty binary was not found during our CI process. Now I thought that Netlify would give you an option for pointing to a specific image. Because if you were to look over here, we actually have an official Docker Hub image. So for Plentico here, if you were to go to this, you can go and you can see that every time we release a new version of Plenty, it builds a new image here with the newest binary of Plenty in there. So really, I thought what we would be able to do on Netlify is just point to this image, build with our image instead of their image that's on their build service, and then we could use Plenty like normal. But if you come over here and you look down, so they have this beta setting here. So build image selection. I figured we'd be able to select a different image here, but if you edit this, you see that they only offer two images. You have an Ubuntu 16 and Ubuntu 14, which is pretty old at this point. Now, I went over here and I looked in some of their documentation. So they have this build image selection. This is still in beta. They need some work on this. Now I'm hoping that down the line, they'll actually let you point to custom images. It seems like that would be a really useful thing to do for a service that is set up to build and deploy many different static site generators, because I think it's pretty limited how it is now. And if you actually were to look at here, you can see that Netlify build images are all stored in the same repository. So you would have to make a PR to this repository to get the new build image. So they have things like Hugo and Jekyll, and then they have some NPM-based static site generators in here as well. But it would make a lot more sense to me if they had individual build images so you could actually build for specific static site generators instead of putting everything all into one image. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but that's where we are today. So we have to think about a different way to deploy our site using Netlify. Now there's an issue over here that I was looking at with someone trying to do pretty much the same thing. So they have a custom static site generator built in Golang. So they want to basically have the binary on Netlify's build service so they can actually build that site. And they're wondering if that's possible. And it says, yes, it's possible. Basically, the description here talks about actually either including your Go code, which is the static site generator that's used to build, and then compiling your Go code into a binary that you can then run on their CI, or including the static pre-built binary in your repository. Either way, you're including the whole Plentico project in your individual project, which is really not necessary. And I don't really think that's the right way to be doing this. I know there's not really a better way to do it at this point, so that's why they're offering this up, but I don't think this is a great solution, to be honest. Someone down here is also talking about packaging up your static site generator in a node module, so an npm module, and then basically in your package.json putting a script in there that allows you to run that build process from npm. So that's actually something we had discussed at one point doing. So if I come over here and I look at the GitHub for Plentico, if I go to the issues here, you can see that there's an issue right here about installing via npm. So we had talked about this a few different times with a couple of different issues, and it's something that I would consider, although I'm a little hesitant. I mean, it would be nice to be able to do this, and it would definitely help with the build process for Netlify. It would give us an option for that, but I'm worried about having multiple processes for building. So if using npm run build becomes the standardized way for building Plenti sites, then people who are using Plenti build, it might be kind of confusing because there's two options to do essentially the same thing. And especially if we start moving away from npm more and more with our project, then this is just kind of hanging out in the background just to support Netlify builds. Now, I'm hoping that Netlify extends their service to allow a different process for this, because having this whole npm process just for that doesn't really seem like it makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm thinking about maybe there's a different way we can approach this. And that's what prompted me to find this project here. So there is a GitHub action, so it's called Netlify deploy. And this GitHub action, essentially what it does is you can build using the GitHub action CI. So we're actually deploying things currently to GitHub pages and GitLab pages because they have a fully fleshed out CI, when that allows you to pull from different Docker Hub images and use different binaries, and it's really flexible, kind of unlike the Netlify process, which isn't really that flexible at this point. So what we can do is we can use something like GitHub Actions, which is a more flexible process, and we can build our site that way. And then basically we can just transfer that compiled asset, so our public folder for our Plenti site, and we can just deploy that right to Netlify directly. So we just cut out their CI process entirely. So that's what we're doing here. And essentially what we're doing is we're going to use our build step, and then we're just going to use this deploy to Netlify action here, and we'll copy this essentially and deploy it to Netlify directly. Now, over here in the documentation on the Plentico site, we have this deployment section called GitHub Actions, and it talks about how you can actually deploy to GitHub pages. And what we're doing here is we're just running this on an Ubuntu 18 computer, and then we're coming here and we're actually grabbing the Docker Hub Plentico Plenti latest image that we just talked about over here on Docker Hub. And then what we're doing is we're running the command to build, and then we're using another GitHub action right here to actually deploy to GitHub pages. Now what we want to do is we want to replace this section here with this action that we found over here. And then what we can do with that is we'll actually have it hooked directly into our Netlify build process. So let's take a look at doing that. Let's go over here to our repository. So let's copy this, and then let's go to our terminal. And let's go onto our desktop, and then let's just clone that repository, and let's cd into that project. Now let's do a Plenti serve just to see this site locally. Copy that link and go back to my browser. So this is what the site looks like. It doesn't look like a lot, but basically you can go to this page here and you have a double pager. So you can page between these two different outputs independently, and they're all server rendered, so you can reload the page and it should work. So that's what we want to deploy. Now let's go back here to our project, And let's open this up in NeoVim. And over here in our file browser, let's create a new folder here. So I'm going to press M to get to my menu. I'm going to add a child node, and I'm going to call this .github. And I'm going to put a / so it becomes a folder. And then I'm going to do a Shift-I to show my hidden folders here. So we have this GitHub folder now. Inside there, I'm going to press M again and add a new child node. And I'm going to put a folder called Workflows. And then inside that folder, I'm going to add a file called Netlify deploy.yml. So it's a YAML file. And then I'm going to open that file and just close my file browser here. Now I'm just going to go back to my browser and switch back over to this documentation, and I'm going to copy this whole build process here. So this is the standard build process using the official Docker Hub Plenty image. So I'm going to copy that, come back here, go into insert mode and paste that in here. And then I'm going to come back here, then I'll go to this GitHub action documentation over here, and I'll grab this step here where we use this GitHub action, copy that, and I'm going to paste that over here. And I'll just fix the indentation a little bit here. Okay. And now we need some optional keys here. So down here, you'll see that there's a build directory key. Now this is set to build, and right now our directory is set to public. We could change that either with our plenty command, or we could change that here. So let's copy this and come over and put this in here, and we'll say public. And let's just do a :W to write this, and a quit. And then let's git add, and we'll say git commit message, add Netlify deploy, and we'll just save that and we'll push it back up. Now if we go back to our repository over here, we come back here to this repository. Okay, so back over here, you'll notice that nothing actually built here. Normally you see a little indicator that this build either succeeded or failed. Now what's happening here is I did a couple things wrong. So if I look at my action over here, you see that I specified firing on a master branch. Now this repository uses the main branch convention. So I would have to come back over here and let's fix that. Let's edit this. Let's go inside that GitHub workflows folder and edit this file again. And at the top here, let's come back here and change this to main. Let's give this a better name. So this is no longer GitHub pages, but this is Netlify deployment. And then down here, let's give this a name as well. So we should add another key here. And we'll say name. And then we'll say deploy to Netlify. And let's just get rid of this here. Can give that some space too. So let's save that. And let's add this. And let's commit it. And we'll say fix Netlify deploy. And we'll git push. And let's go back to our repository over here and give this a reload. So now you see this little yellow indicator. So that shows that this CI process is running. We could click into it to see more details. Click on details. So the deployment to Netlify failed. Let's take a look at what's going on here. This GitHub action is actually doing a lot of NPM stuff behind the scenes, which just really does not seem necessary to me. So I'm going to actually go and use a different GitHub action. So there's this other one here. Now, this GitHub action has a little less popularity, so it only has 2 stars, but it looks like it might be more what we're looking for. So let's come here and let's grab this deploy to Netlify section here, and let's copy this. And we'll come back to our local project, and I'm going to edit it again. And let's see all the files, and let's come up here and open this up. And let's just edit this section here. We'll get rid of this, and we'll paste the new section here. So save that. Let me come back here to the documentation. So this action requires that the files are deployed and built inside a build directory. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come back here, and so in our build, so we automatically create a public directory, but we can set this using dir equals build. And so now that'll create the static assets in a directory called build. Now this is something that's subject to change in the 0.4 release. So we didn't think this was a good naming convention. So this might be changed to something like output. Just keep that in mind if you're watching this video later on. So we'll save that. We're compliant with that. Then we're going to have to create the access token again. So I deleted my last access token that I just created. Let's create a new one. We'll call this Jim's GitHub one more time. I'll generate the token and I'll copy this. Say done. So we have a new access token, and I'll come over here to our site and I'll scroll up and I'll go to the settings. And I'll come back down here to secrets. And I'll add a new secret. And I'll paste the value. And this time the secret's name is Netlify auth token. So I'll copy that. And I'll come back here and I'll put that as my secret name. And I'll add the secret. And now we need one more secret here, so I'll add a new secret. And this one will be called Netlify site ID. So I'll copy this. I'll put it in here. And now our site ID, if we come back over here and we scroll up on our Netlify site, and under general site details, we have the app ID. And so we'll copy this and I'll go back over here to my GitHub settings and I'll paste the Netlify site ID and I'll add that secret. So now we have both those environment variables set up. Let's come back over here and let's just save this. We'll add, we'll git commit, and we'll say new Netlify deploy GitHub action. And let's push this, which should kick off a new build over here. So if we come back and we look back at our repository, we have a new build running. Let's check out the details. So this video might have got a little choppy because I was trying several different things. So I tried using a Netlify deploy GitHub action here, and you can see this one's a little more popular with 24 stars. And then I found this article here that describes a process, and there is also a GitHub action that is put in here. So if I open this up, there's a similar GitHub action that has 2 stars, a little less popular. And I tried both of these out, but ultimately they were really specific about where they wanted things placed. So for instance, this GitHub action wanted a build directory named build, and it wanted it moved to a specific place. This GitHub action over here installed a lot of NPM things, and it actually wanted to NPM build your site unless you go through and you actually change some of these flags out of their defaults to be false. And I decided ultimately the easiest thing to do is really just come in here and use this run command. So we're using the Netlify CLI, so you can install the Netlify CLI with npm right here, and then you can just run this command to deploy your site. So that's ultimately what we ended up doing. Now we use the same access tokens as this GitHub action over here. So you can see that we needed the Netlify site ID and Netlify auth token. I just put those values in over here for the site flag and the auth flag because those are where they're being applied. And then if you check over here, we actually have our site deploying and it finished successfully this time. You can see how all the checks worked out. And if you want to actually look at what the file is for our GitHub action, let's just take a look here in our workflows folder in our Netlify deploy YAML. This is the final file that I ended up using. So basically we have the name Netlify deployment. We're deploying on the main branch. Then we use an Ubuntu 18 operating system, and we pull in the Docker Hub image for the latest Plenty binary. And then basically we run the build command, and that will build a public folder. It'll be called public. And then we set up Node.js just because we need it for the Netlify CLI. So we set up Node, and then down here we actually npm install the Netlify CLI, and then we just use that to push out our site. So it pushes out that public folder, you can see right here, over to Netlify using these secrets that we set up. And when you come over here to the site, and if I go in here and I look at my site that I created here, I can see that the site has been deployed, and I can actually come up here and I can click on this It opens the site, and you can see that this is the Netlify site now for that app, and I can go to this page, and you can see that you have the different pages here, and everything is working appropriately. Now, I'll work on updating some of the documentation, and hopefully we can streamline this a little bit to make it easier in the future. But for now, this should allow you to push from GitHub over to Netlify, so every time you push to your master branch or merge something in there, it should actually redeploy your site. You could do something similar with GitLab and Bitbucket. You just have to use their CI tools instead of the GitHub Actions CI. Thanks for watching, and happy coding!